for being here. Mike, nice to have you here again. It's always a pleasure to have you here. I had the chance to bump into Mike years ago and had the chance to attend a lot of his sets, a lot of his lectures, talks, and workshops. And Mike has a big fan base in this whole area, so I'm glad you enjoyed the party yesterday.
Definitely, definitely.
Mike Huckaby is a producer, DJ, teacher, and sound designer from Detroit, and has been the fan base gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and has had a very big influence on, well, what I have been doing for a long time. So it has been the person I started looking up to very early, and I had the big chance to join him in different
We
things.
actually met on MySpace. I was looking for people that had good mixes for my for my radio show. And he said I had one. I listened to it. I liked it. And then, from there, we just kept in contact, kept talking. He was interested in Detroit, showed a lot of ways that the Ruhr area paralleled Detroit. And it was just a connection. And things just started rolling from there.
And one of the topics we have been talking about in the past years is the future. And I had a very funny encounter 4 days ago with a young person that was describing a new record that came out that Mike Huckaby brought out 2 weeks ago for the Crate Diggers event in London. And well, it's a techno track with a repetitive vocal that keeps repeating the word future. And the funny thing about this encounter was that this young guy told me, this track is mad, it reminds me about techno of the 90s. And there was a bit of a paradox, because I thought this track is pointing out the future, and the reference is something that happened in the 90s. So what I'd like to ask you, because I didn't have time to talk to you about it, what ignited the first step of taking this vocal or pointing out the future in this track?
Okay, well, actually, here's a copy for you.
That's what I was trying to do.
This was again a collaboration with Discogs. Actually, Discogs put the release out. They contacted me to do a party in London, and they were giving out 500 copies of this track for free. And it's these type of collaborations that just keep coming up, which are just amazing, and you're really inspired to do something like this. And it's actually a remix of a project I have called My Life with the Wave, based on a particular synthesizer. All the music is made from that synthesizer. And so this would be My Life with the Wave 2.73. And the reason that it's called 2.73 is because I finished it on July 3rd. So I thought that would be the appropriate name, since I didn't want to say that it was My Life with the Wave 3 as well. So I came up with My Life with the Wave 2.3. And the future sample is actually me saying future right in front of my laptop. And that goes a bit into my production aesthetics, that you really need to identify which ways that your voice can be utilized, because there's a certain frequency or capacity that your own voice can be manipulated, and if you don't discover in which ways that your own voice can be used, you're kind of missing out on a lot of things. And
well, this kind of tracks was actually the first door that was open to me to discover Mike Huckaby's work. But going back to the party of yesterday, it was another project you have been doing for 5-6 years now. It's a tour based on music by Sun Ra. You worked on a couple of edits also 5 or 6 years ago.
Yep.
And in one review, it was described as the techno sound of the future, which is based on recordings from the 70s, which was also a bit interesting. What was your link to working with material from Sun Ra? How did it came about?
Well, it came about working with Rush Hour, talking to some of the guys that worked there, and I told them I had started the Sun Ra parties maybe a year before this project with editing Sun Ra, and I was simply talking to them about maybe doing one of those parties in Amsterdam, and they said, I told them I had like several Sun Ra edits, and he said, well, you want to put them out? And so like it just started, the conversation started from right there, and they licensed the Sun Ra edits from the orchestra. They got approved from the orchestra to listen to the edits, and basically it was just this magical moment where like the answer was yes to everything. In July, I played before the orchestra in New York. Was really a crazy experience to play before the orchestra and meet a lot of the live band members. I met Marshall Allen. He signed an original copy of Doors of the Cosmos for me. So it's been a growing thing where I was told that this idea would never work. I was told that like these reel-to-reel parties would never work. That people were saying, well, I don't see why he's bringing a reel-to-reel to a party. It's useless. And you just have to like trust yourself and go with your own instinct. And strange enough, I saw on Facebook today, a guy posted, he said that somebody asked him, he said, hey man, how do I become a legend? And he said, it's simple, just do something legendary. And so you really just have to like follow your own instincts and block out a lot of the negativity, and things will just happen.
And you described the crowd yesterday as very open-minded and that they were enjoying the music as obscure as it was and got. And I remember the first time we had a chat, you told me that the best period of time for music coming out from Detroit was before people in Europe knew that there was music coming from Detroit.
Yep, yeah, that's true.
And taking now the second step.
But that only lasted for about 10 minutes because the rest of the world just jumped on it. But it was a special time before any distributor got the music into the shops, before any Detroit artists were coming over, because the world just gravitated towards this music coming from the city immensely. And like you have this German side of the story, you also have this London side of the story, and they're the same story, but they're different.
And how does this story affect your work, or knowing that there are people not really, that were not addressed by Sun Ra, now perceiving the music or enjoying this music without probably reflecting what the igniting moment was of this music?
Well, I mean, it's kind of based on the fact that like these things have always been there, and it's just that people are now finding out about these things. Just like Afrobeat music is really popular now, but it's always been there, and a lot of artists have been around since 40 to 50 years ago, and like you're now hearing these tracks. That comes about from the internet giving you these endless ways to discover new things. But I found that crowd last night like extremely open-minded. The dance floor was packed in there listening to Afrobeat music, Sun Ra music. That actually can rival something in Berlin, actually, just the open-mindedness of the crowd. And you know, the one thing I would like to just basically tell German people is that you have a lot of creativity and flexibility that we in the United States don't have. And you might possibly take that for granted, but it would take somebody from the States to tell you that because you live here and so you don't notice. But like, I'll never forget when I was working with Ableton. And I was doing these workshops all over the place. And then one of the colleagues at Ableton told me that the general manager said, look, tell Mike, whatever workshop he can get in Europe, just go for it. And see, you will never work with an American company like that on like this grassroots level, and they just know that something's working and they jump in and support it. Or you're sitting at lunch with somebody from Ableton and like it's past an hour and you're like saying, man, don't you got to go back? And they just like, no, if I go back later, I'll stay later. It doesn't work like that in the United States. Everything is really rigid and organized, and there's a penalty for overindulging in something. So that's something you don't really understand that you have the freedom of.
I think it doesn't happen that much that somebody says that Germany is flexible and not rigid. Thank you for that. But going back to the other part of your work, being a teacher and dealing with young people who also think about their future. In Detroit, you spoke about, well, the work you have done already, but the work you are now doing in the library. And when we spoke like a couple of years ago, you told me, because I had this notion of kids growing up with the music that was produced in Detroit, and you told me that the interests differ completely from what I had thought. But this notion of future or techno music being a sort of a sort of search for something new, is it something that is part of your teachings, like trying to push the boundaries that all the people have already done in Detroit, like back in the days?
It is to some degree, but then that window of opportunity to incorporate or expose new music to students is not necessarily all times there. It really comes from their parents or their relatives listening to this type of music, and they heard it, so they accept it, because their peers are really not into electronic music. They're more into like hip-hop, or the radio kind of dominates what they are listening to on their peers. So it's not necessarily a easy, open path to turning on a kid to like music different than his peers would listen to. But when you do have that chance to converse with these students, and they listen and then they absorb things and then they ask questions about how are these tracks produced, how did like Kanye West or Rick Ross do this effect on a particular part in the track, and then you have to explain that in your own terms or what the program is you're working with to show them how that's done. So that's what opens the doors to the possibility.
I had a talk with one of your friends, Geology, a couple of months ago, who is also a DJ and a producer from New York. And he also had like this type of workshops with young people, and he told me the first thing I try to tell the kids is to make them aware that dance music and dance music culture is a black music culture and is black music. And Mike Banks once said that his main interest is to invest into the community and to empower kids to grow. Last time when you visited us, you told me that Detroit is doing better now and there are more things happening, but in one sentence you told me, but not everybody's profiting from it.
No, that's true. But the one thing you need to understand about, well, the one thing I learned about working with kids is you have to meet them where they are. You can't address them where you want them to be, because if you do that, you're just going to be like some dude that for an hour that they just want to ignore. You have to meet them where they're at. You have to understand what it means to be young and black at 16 years old and everything that comes with. So when you do that, you have to accept what somebody young, black, and 16 is listening to. And you can't really criticize it or tell them that their music they're listening to is stupid. Because if you blow that opportunity, then you're on the way to like disrespect, an unorderly classroom, and this basically the window of like disrespecting you will come about. Because if you cannot get them to respect you and obey you, then there's nothing you can teach them. It all has to stem from that. So even though a lot of times I don't like trap music, it becomes really challenging to show these kids like how this method in a certain trap song is achieved, and then achieved through the means of the program you're using. So that becomes a challenge in itself. So basically, I would have to say that.
And trying to bring all together, like the Sun Ra part, your teachings, and your work as a producer, how much does the notion of Afrofuturism that you spoke about within the scope of Sun Ra affect both your teachings and your personal work, or your work on your other productions?
Well, it's really interesting because I was taking piano lessons for 10 years, and I took a Sun Ra track into my instructor. I said, man, show me how like he played that one chord progression. Like, what is this all about? And my instructor said, man, don't even worry about it. He said, man, just keep practicing the lessons that I'm giving you, and you'll come to that. He said, you're just listening to him and his life. You're just hearing him express his life at a particular moment in this track. And that was true. I think for me, like, Sun Ra is just like a immensely disciplined musician to me. And what draws me to Sun Ra is his ability to introduce a sense of disaster and calamity in a chord progression and then resolve that beautifully. And if you really think about, if you're listening to Sun Ra, you will agree that like that's what really is happening in his tracks. That like he goes into these really dissonant like chord structures, and where like harmonies are like really expanded, and then like he just resolves that like beautifully. And so for me, like when I saw that he was doing that in the tracks, this guy's got to be a genius of like this tonality in the scale, and so I respect his discipline for being able to do that and to evoke those type of emotions from the scale and to affect his listening audience. So for me, that's what Sun Ra, because I know what Sun Ra is for me and I know what Sun Ra isn't for me. And see, that's also the difference. You have to know your role in everything. Just for me, with certain like Sun Ra tracks I edited, my edit only differentiated from the original by like 11 seconds. Because being a student of music theory, I had to create edits that were believable and something that a jazz musician would play maybe once or two times and never like some delay effect on it or like some techno thinking method try to impose something that a techno producer would do or something that a house music producer did. I had to keep it in the realm of something that a jazz listening person would do and that a jazz musician would play. Really, really important.
And since it's not only about this part of the room, I don't know if how much time we still have, but 10 minutes. And I would like to maybe try to find out if somebody in the audience has some questions directed to Mike, or maybe some kind of input we could maybe discuss all together instead of just like keeping it in a one-way discussion. I don't know, do we have a microphone for the audience, or shall I run a room? Are there questions? Yay.
Did you ever do any of your Sunra parties in Detroit? If so, how were they received?
Well, they were quite disappointing, actually. Yes, I did a few in Detroit. And the reception of these parties has always been tremendous in Europe. Did Sunra parties in Berlin, did Sunra parties in Italy, Jerusalem, all over the place. And ironically, Detroit was probably the worst received party I could do a Sunra party in. It's a bit true where, like, you know, you're really underappreciated in your own hometown. Some of that rings true a bit. But I would say it's been like the liberalness of Europe. And again, like you as a European German citizen don't even know what I'm talking about because you're here and you're living here. But I could describe it as the liberalness of your society, your culture, the cultural institutions support electronic music, the schools, the different institutions here, all validate electronic music. So that, to me, seems to like trickle down to the underground and the person that's growing up and trying to make electronic music, that somehow this music is being accepted from all different factors of society here.
Well, you know, the Afrofuturist community in Detroit is pretty, it's growing and it's becoming more solidified, so maybe we could do another Sunra party in the near future attached to that community because they would be more open to a Sunra party, if that makes sense.
In Detroit?
Yeah, because I know that that is an issue. Everybody has this issue that when any of all of you play in Detroit, the reception's really low. And I always wonder why that is. And I grew up with Detroit techno, and I grew up in the house music scene because of my cousin. But I think, you know, just even trying to tap into maybe some other underground scenes that are not as well known in Detroit can help to like grow it over time.
Well, see, first of all, like, well, you take Europe, for example, where vinyl sales are just thriving right now, and most of the vinyl sales, you as a Detroit artist, is coming from Europe. the demand is coming from Europe, the appreciation is coming from Europe, more so than the United States. Again, due to different aspects of the culture here and the society here. So in Detroit, where it's just a thing where like it doesn't really catch on or explode as quickly and as appreciated as quickly as it is in Europe. And it just is one of those things where that's not necessarily the case. Things are like always developing slowlier in Detroit, but these are like really important developments that are developing slowly, and they usually affect the rest of the world. That's what we give as a gift to the rest of the world. We don't give you the appreciation that something in Detroit that's happening in Europe is also happening as fast as it is in Europe, but we do give you this groundbreaking phenomenon that will take place and then influence the rest of the world. This is how it is.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very fascinating talk. I feel like this is a hub, turns more and more into a hub to understand our trans-diasporic dynamics, ways, paths, and also limits. And I feel like, I just got this sense of, here is again, kind of a hurdle maybe of translation or the perspective. So I don't know so much about Detroit. All I know is actually through Ingrid, and I'm very, very happy with that and very, very proud to know her. But I do know Europe, and I do know Europe quite a lot. And I hear you what you say in a sense of developing something there and influencing the world, and I would definitely agree. And this is just, from my perspective and my experience in Europe, to say that sometimes it feels like there's so much more possible here, certainly when it comes to Afrofuturism in the last decade or decade and a half, and that is exactly something which we should, investigate and ask why this is now. And one of the dynamics is certainly that it's pretty easy to celebrate, to almost worship, and even to pass around the other, the other in terms of, great minds, great creative minds from the US, from the continent or other diasporic places, and we are happy to have you here and to celebrate you and to make you even bigger as we think we do in Europe, make everything bigger, and then channeling people out again very easily. So I think this was just, the one perspective why it could be one, explanation why you feel like it's easier to have a gig in Berlin or in Rome or somewhere else, because at the same time I don't think it's the same, perception for black artists located in Europe, and it's basically what we will talk about in a minute later.
Well, I mean, it just goes back to the beginning. Yes, we were fans of Detroit electronic music in the beginning. We are still in Detroit fans of Detroit electronic music, but you will have to agree that Europe was always the bigger market from the days the first trans metal and Juan Atkins release came out. Europe always gravitated towards that sound and that phenomenon that was happening in that city and embraced it and gave a lot of DJs from Detroit a lot of opportunities to play in German clubs, to play in European clubs, to release their own music on these labels in Europe. And so like it's a bit of the rural connection here that we have seen like the similarities and a bit of the differences in this Ruhr area and Detroit, and how Detroit has struggled and how the Ruhr area has struggled. And I did a workshop in Dusseldorf called Shrinking Cities, and they discussed how Dusseldorf was shrinking and how Detroit was shrinking, and this was maybe over 10 years ago. And now there is no discussion about a shrinking city anymore. Detroit is thriving, it's coming back. There's a lot of things going on in the downtown and even in the communities, because on the block that I used to live on, the park there was really run down and just wasn't well taken care of. Now, new swings, new concrete, new everything that you could participate in, new walkway, new concrete, new pavement. These things have all been taken care of. And so when you want to say that like it's not extending to the communities in Detroit, you really can't say that, because I can walk out the street of where my mom lives and show you that like there is evidence of this happening. So again, it's always been, there was a larger market that would have a lot to say about why they felt that this music was a bit so special to the rest of the world. And basically, yeah.
Hi there. Yeah, thanks a lot actually for sharing some of those insights. It's really interesting. I was wondering, so I would like to hear your idea on one question basically. So I think if you look at the music of Sun Ra in particular, but I think what I find interesting to see the kind of parallel lines between music like such of Sun Ra and others, and if you compare it to, I think, those moments that happened on the dance floor, it reminds me a little bit of an interview I just saw recently with, I think, Margaret Miller, who said that there's this point where everyone, the musicians, the audience, everyone is in there, get kind of driven by a moment, and it's kind of this escapism even in a way. And I think you can see this in dance and music culture. I think you can definitely, obviously see it not just in Sun Ra's music, but I think in his whole oeuvre, in his movies. This kind of escapism, getting away from this place through music, through an arch or an arc. And I wonder how that kind of links back to the very, very, very concrete reality that you see, say, in a city like Detroit, but I really like the analogy of the Ruhr area and Detroit, this post-industrial areas that is obviously a good basis for escapism at the one end, but I think at some point the club closes, right? So at some point you go back to your grim, maybe grim, but at least your real life. And I was wondering, how do you see, or what is the potential of music and of this kind of communal joint moments that you happen on the dance floor, of taking that back to your real life instead of, I mean, at one point, as I said, you have to leave the club, the music kind of finishes. So what have you seen, what have you seen as the power of this experience for people bridging this gap in a way?
Well, again, you really have to just kind of accept that this music was always around you, but you just weren't there. Again, like Afrobeat and Afro music from Africa is like really, really, really popular now, and where like you couldn't even really like access a lot of these music. A lot of these tracks are being licensed and picked up and discovered by major labels. Whether they're doing this legally or not, that is another question, because I think maybe a lot of these African artists don't even know that their music is being reissued on certain labels, and so that is a whole nother story, but it really just goes back to the fact that a lot of things were there always, and like you're just picking up on them, and the fact that we live in this informational age where like the computer can introduce you to anything and so much of anything about anything that people are picking up on like this music, and it's a worldwide phenomenon that Afro music in itself is becoming a lot more popular and is actually being validated to the point where like it's a worthy genre of music to listen to instead of like something that like is so dark or obscured or like just evil bush music or something, and that like is some music that you just want to stay away from. It's actually the opposite, where it's like embraced. People want to hear more from it. People want to understand where more releases of this is coming from, and want to discover the discographies of like these different artists. And like there's so many different records coming out from like Africa that you would never know about if it wasn't for the internet, and that they're available in like your local record shop now. So here in 2017, I think the Afro music kind of can parallel what was happening in Detroit. And I don't think that anybody is ever going to make that connection or to talk about that connection, but that element is there. So when you see somebody picking interest in Sun Ra, well, it's going to stem back to like all of his ethics that he put into the music, what he was really trying to, the message he was trying to project from his music, and just his overall intent. Like you will hear that, you will feel that, you will experience that in his music in some type of way. So it's kind of like a universal thing that everybody is thinking at the same time all over the world.
That was the sign for thank you. Was it also the sign for thank you? It was amazing. Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank you, Mike, and thank you for the questions.
And it's always really interesting to see like how the Ruhr area is developing. I don't think that there are the same problems that existed 10 years ago here now. I think that this area is growing in on its own terms, where like there isn't this validation from Berlin and I think that like you could possibly see this city or this region being the hot spot in the next 10 years where everybody is moving to. I don't think anybody here now would think that something like that happened, but I think it could be true where a lot of people from these cities that are like invincible would start moving to this area.
And as I said earlier on, it's well, as long as we get the chance to have people like you here that influence our work, but also, well, gives us the strength to work hard to move on. And as long as there are similar formats that invite so many artists and people that, well, give us the input and the motivation to carry on, I think we're on a good way to, well, to moving on. Thank you so much. Thank you.